I was shocked to learn what Grok knows about the Eurodollar system, and I want to share some of my findings with you. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Layer. I'm Nik Bhatia. In today's episode, I will share a conversation I had with an AI about the Eurodollar system. Now, I have been studying the Eurodollar system for many years. In 2001, I published Layered Money, a book about the hierarchy of money, including why gold used to be at the top of the monetary stack, why treasuries today fill that role, and why Bitcoin might continue to fill that role in the future. Now, about halfway through Layered Money, I explained the origins of the Eurodollar system and why the quantity of Eurodollars makes the dollar system itself unstable and it makes it immeasurable. In that book, I also explained that Eurodollar banks, while they might have some U.S. treasuries on their balance sheets, they don't have access to the Federal Reserve. They don't have reserve balances at the Fed, and therefore they don't have a way to settle interbank transfers with a central banking system. That means that the Eurodollar system and Eurodollar banks largely operate in their own universe. Now, many of these banks have US dollar deposits on deposit in New York, meaning that a Eurodollar bank has assets that are US dollar deposits. So in that way, a Eurodollar does have some connection with the onshore dollar system, but it's a lot more complicated than that. For my second book, Bitcoin Age, I did much deeper research into the origins of the Eurodollar, where it came from, what were the motivations behind it, and one of the key explorations that I made in this book is whose fault was the Eurodollar system's growth? Was it something that the U.S. approved of? Was it something that the U.S. was unaware of? Who were the actors that moved the Eurodollar system to the mainstream? Now, I do recommend that people go check out my two books. They're both available on Amazon as well as on audio. So if you want a deeper dive into the history of the Eurodollar system, definitely go start there. But I'm going to summarize my conversation with Grok because of late, I'm starting to think a lot more about the Eurodollar system, its fragility, but most importantly, this idea that we are in a capital war. We are in a financial war. We are in an economic war. And if you're paying any attention to the Trump administration and what they've been rolling out, it's actually all wartime agenda from the economic side of things. That's the way it appears to me when we read the speeches that come out of the White House. We get that sense that the United States at this moment feels that other nations have been the aggressor, namely China, and that the U.S. is now going to respond likewise. So thinking about the Eurodollar system and its role in a state of economic warfare, you might imagine a scenario in which the U.S. government that for the last 60 years has not had a very strong control over the supply of U.S. dollars, that the U.S. might want to put a stop to that system in which it doesn't have any control. Today's episode is brought to you by Unchained, the Human Rights Foundation, and Blockstream. Are you looking for the perfect video to push your friends from 0 to 1 on Bitcoin? Don't miss this excellent 3-part series with Parker Lewis and Dhruv Bansal called Bitcoin Not Crypto. Go to unchained.com/TBL for more. The Financial Freedom Report is a free weekly newsletter from the Human Rights Foundation that tracks authoritarian regimes and how they are weaponizing money against people and how Bitcoin is acting as a solution. A one-of-a-kind newsletter connecting the dots between financial repression, geopolitics, and emerging technology. Find the link in our show notes and subscribe to their free newsletter today. Blockstream Jade Plus is the easiest and most secure way to protect your Bitcoin. With a sleek design, simple setup, and easy step-by-step instructions, you'll be securing your Bitcoin in minutes. Pair it with your Blockstream Green app on your smartphone. Want more security? Jade Plus works with multi-sig, so you can pair it perfectly with Unchained. Take control of your Bitcoin. You can go to store.blockstream.com and use code TBL for 10% off your entire order. Now, it's okay if you're brand new to the Eurodollar system. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, a basics explanation of what this system is. But before I do that, I want to explain one of the most important moments of my book, Bitcoin Age, in which the Eurodollar system enters into the mainstream financial system. And this moment was in the early 1960s. The Fed was starting to learn that banks in the city of London and in continental Europe were starting to bank dollar clients. And so where does that come from? When the US purchases things from Europe, we get goods sent to us via ship, and we export dollars that end up in Europe. Now, those dollars, whether they're physical paper dollars or dollar balances with New York banks, these are dollars that are now owned by those in Europe. And so that's how the system started. Basically, imagine the United States buying raw materials from China, shipping US dollar paper currency across the sea, and then when we get those goods, the deal is done. Those dollars are now in Asia physically, and China takes those dollars and doesn't deposit them back in New York, but decides to deposit them at a French bank called BCEN. That in French, it stands for the Commercial Bank of Northern Europe, and it used the Hungarian central bank as an acting agent. So the Chinese government got its dollar balances at a bank in Paris, and now it has a dollar balance at a Paris bank. And those dollars that the Chinese government owns are not banked by any New York entity. Now, BCEN itself might own New York deposits, but those New York deposits are not the exposure that the Chinese government has to the dollar system. Now it has an exposure only to a bank in France. And so that is how you get a Eurodollar system. You get dollars outside of the United States. And a fascinating story about where the name Eurodollar came from. It's funny that in the writing of Layered Money, when I published it in 2021, writing it in 2020, I didn't do the necessary or the deep enough research to happen about the origin of the word Eurodollar. I believed at the time that Eurodollar came from dollars that were held at European banks. Therefore, they were European dollars of a sort. However, this is not entirely accurate. BCEN, this bank that I'm telling you about from France, which was a Soviet-linked bank. And so there were a lot of political reasons that Soviet-related or Chinese Communist Party-related entities did not want to put dollars in New York. They wanted to put them at banks in Europe that were friendly to them because of the fear of asset seizure. Now, we have a real-life example of this in 2022 with the Russia-Ukraine war and U.S. dollar assets that were owned by Russia being frozen or seized by U.S. authorities. So in 2022, we have an example, but it's actually 70 years after a lot of this initial Eurodollar activity. So the Fed found out about this Eurodollar banking system starting up and sent a delegation to Europe to investigate what was going on. And it came back and wrote in its findings that this dollar system that was evolving in Europe was probably a good thing, even though the US didn't have control over it. So it was probably a good thing because it was a free market response to the desire for entities to hold dollars regardless of where it was. Now, part of this story is that the United States had a regulation since the 1930s called Regulation Q. Now, in Reg Q, the United States banks were capped in the rate that they were allowed to offer to their clients. Imagine that today, where Wells Fargo, Citibank, and Bank of America all had a fixed maximum deposit rate that they could offer to their clients. It means that as the Fed hikes rates, they wouldn't be able to increase deposit rates accordingly. The reason that this regulation was put into place was initially to prevent destabilizing competition between American banks. So imagine that if 3 different banks in the US, Wells Fargo, Citi, and Bank of America, all had 3% deposit rates, the likelihood of a Wells Fargo client taking his money out and going to Bank of America to get a higher deposit rate would be 0, because the competition between banks was strictly limited by this deposit rate cap. Now, they did have to adjust it over time as market interest rates adjusted, but the key here is that the United States had a banking regulation called Reg Q, which completely destroyed the free market of deposits and for deposits in the US. And so in the 1950s and 60s, those dollars that were ending up in Europe, they didn't find their way back to New York because the London and European banks were offering market interest rates that were higher than the rates that were capped in the United States per Regulation Q. So yes, there are these Soviet and political origins to the Eurodollar, but there's a fundamental American banking regulatory flaw that is from the 1930s that set the stage for dollar flight to Europe. Now, to fully understand the Eurodollar system, don't think of it as dollar flight to Europe, but rather dollars that end up in Europe because the United States is importing goods. And those dollars that end up in Europe, they never come back. Now, sometimes those dollars come back and buy U.S. treasuries and U.S. stocks. And that is in the center of the conversation right now around the trade war, U.S. trade deficits, and therefore capital surpluses. Those capital surpluses are those dollars that we are exporting abroad. They come back and they buy U.S. treasuries and U.S. stocks. And the reason why U.S. markets were under pressure at the beginning of April was this idea that if the U.S. is going to limit, it's not even idea, it's actually a flow or a pricing in a flow, that if the U.S. is going to export less dollars, there will be less dollars available to buy U.S.-based assets and support U.S. asset prices. Now, the Fed in 1960 determined that the money that was coming out of the United States and into Europe, the fact that it was staying in Europe invested at market-based interest rates prevented one very, very important thing from happening. It prevented European dollar balances from being converted to gold and depleting the U.S. gold stock at the margin. But on the aggregate, this was happening to the point that it overwhelmed the U.S. gold stock, and President Nixon in 1971 had to close the gold window. They had to end this arrangement that foreign official entities could exchange dollar balances for gold. Spain and France specifically, was the main culprit in terms of converting dollar balances to gold and running down the U.S. gold stock. All of this led to the closing of the gold window, but in the early 1960s, the Fed viewed the Eurodollar system as one of the only ways to prevent gold conversions on the aggregate. And so we saw the Fed look to the Eurodollar system and actually see something that it approved, it tacitly approved. And when this Fed paper came out, what it did is it inspired US-based banks like Citibank and like Chase Manhattan to go to the city of London, set up branches. Citibank had a branch there that they renewed life into, and these banks started to engage in Eurodollar banking because Citi could now get dollars at market interest rates, meaning they could offer market yields to customers, gain deposits, and then use those deposits in global banking activity. Now, the last thing before I get into my conversation with Grok is to explain to you guys why I've been thinking a lot about the Eurodollar system lately. The reason I'm thinking about China is that when the US exports dollars to China when it imports goods, what it has been doing over the last 10 to 20 years is helping China build up its country, build up its industrial base, build up its military. But almost most importantly for this conversation, it helped it engage in its Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is something that China has been working on for many years. It's their way of taking the ancient Silk Road and making it modern, bringing Chinese trade to every corner of the planet that it can. And in that way, China is trying to increase its influence around the world and its sphere of economic activity. The ironic thing about the Belt and Road Initiative is that it is almost entirely financed in dollar terms, meaning that when China sends money or lends money to a country to build a port, let's say in Africa or in Latin America, it is lending dollars. Where do you think that those dollars come from? They come from the US when we export dollars and import goods. But the Eurodollar system is not a transparent system, and it is certainly not a one-to-one system. So in that way, we can imagine that the Chinese government or Chinese actors are potentially leveraging the dollar balances that we have sent them in their own banks to extend the Eurodollar universe domiciled in China. And there's no way that I can imagine we could know how many dollars are being issued from China and what the reserve ratio is, meaning how many dollar balances did we actually send them and how many liabilities are they issuing with the process of credit creation. This is the reason that I went to Grok. I wanted to talk to Grok about the Eurodollar and China, because what I read about the Eurodollar system, first of all, it's not transparent, so it's really hard to see numbers unless you are going through every single bank balance sheet, earnings statement, and annual report. And that's not something that I do. And maybe Grok is doing that in a way that I guess no human or hedge fund is even doing right now. So I feel that there's an enormous opportunity to learn. And now to what I posted on social media. Just went down a Eurodollar rabbit hole with Grok. Dear Lord, what have I seen? Now, some people thought that this might have been my first exploration into the Eurodollar system, or even recommended that I check out Jeff Snyder's work. Well, people that have been following this channel for a long time know that I've been following Jeff Snyder's work for many years and actually used a lot of Jeff Snyder's Eurodollar University material while researching Layered Money, my first book. So it wasn't my first experience learning about the Eurodollar, But even still, I stumbled upon information. It made me question how much the US is thinking about these things in its economic warfare state. Because actually, the president released a video on social media today. Released a few clips. This was a 2-minute clip. I usually don't watch these things. The first 10 seconds came across the screen and I could see the subtitles in a state of economic warfare. And this was the first line of the video. And it was Trump speaking himself. So it confirms my thesis that the policy actions should be taken from an economic warfare perspective. And if you take that perspective that we are in an economic war, it helps us understand a lot of the things that are happening better. And so when I think about economic warfare between the US and China, more and more I'm thinking about the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative that is the Eurodollar system. This is actually the Eurodollar system today. In the 1970s, the Eurodollar system was the petrodollar system because you had the US buying oil from the Middle East at high prices, exporting dollars to the Middle East. They banked in London, and it furnished an entire Eurodollar system. So today, the Middle East selling oil in dollars to finance the Eurodollar system, it has less impact than what is happening with the US and China. So that's why I'm thinking about this so much. So to get started, I asked Grok just to see where it was at. I heard you understand the Eurodollar system quite well. Now, I already knew this because I had previous conversations with Grok about the Eurodollar. So, and I've seen Grok post about the Eurodollar when people are engaging with it. So I just wanted to get it started. And it said that the Eurodollar system is a complex but fascinating part of global finance, places like London, Hong Kong, or the Cayman Islands. Now, notice it said Hong Kong as the second location before it even knew that I wanted to talk about China. That was the first thing that I noticed here. Now, the last thing it said was if you want specifics like its role in a particular crisis, its impact on monetary policy, or how it's evolving with things like SOFR or digital currencies, let me know and I can dive deeper. So maybe Grok is seeing that I'm tweeting about SOFR or Bitcoin and said this, but maybe not really relevant. And then I get started with my exploration. I said, when U.S. companies buy things from China, those dollars remain as Eurodollars if they stay abroad, correct? So I wanted to anchor Grok in my approach. Grok says, yes, that's correct, but let me clarify the process. When U.S. companies buy goods from China, they typically pay in U.S. dollars. Those dollars are deposited into the Chinese exporter's bank account, often in a bank outside the U.S., for example, in China, Hong Kong, or elsewhere. If those dollars remain in a bank outside the U.S., they become part of the Eurodollar system, U.S. dollar-denominated deposits held in foreign banks. Here's how it works. The Chinese exporter receives dollars in their bank account. If that bank is outside the U.S., the deposit is a Eurodollar. The bank can lend those dollars out to other businesses or banks within the global financial system, keeping the funds offshore. That's the Belt and Road Initiative. Right there, that is the Belt and Road Initiative. These dollars don't return to the U.S. banking system unless they're explicitly repatriated, meaning converted to another currency or deposited into a U.S. bank. So, as long as those dollars stay in foreign banks and are used for lending, trade, or investment abroad, they remain Eurodollars. This is a key reason why the Eurodollar market is so massive. It captures a huge chunk of global dollar-based transactions. If you want to dig into what China does with those dollars, investing in U.S. treasuries or recycling them, let me know. Then I asked the question that really got into the details that I was not expecting at all. But I wanted to test to see how deep of detail Grok understood about this. So I said, which banks and which ones are in China and which ones are in Hong Kong? Because I understand the dynamic between China and Hong Kong, with Hong Kong being the financial center and the area in which banks are connected to the West from China. So I wanted to understand a little bit. And the response I got was extremely comprehensive, and I wasn't expecting it. Grok says, the Eurodollar system involves U.S. dollar-denominated deposits held in banks outside of the U.S., including China and Hong Kong. Below, I'll outline the key banks involved in handling Eurodollars in these regions, based on their roles in international finance, offshore banking, and dollar-based transactions. Note that specific data on Eurodollar activities is often opaque due to the offshore and unregulated nature of the market, but I'll provide the most relevant information based on available sources and financial patterns. So it's picking up financial patterns, which are fascinating. And I bet you that a lot of this information is within the documentation of the Belt and Road Initiative. So banks handling Eurodollars in China. In mainland China, Eurodollar activities are primarily conducted by major state-owned and commercial banks that participate in international trade, cross-border payments, and offshore dollar transactions. Bank of China. One of China's big four, the Bank of China is a major player in handling U.S. dollar transactions, including Eurodollars, due to its extensive global network and role in trade finance. Trade finance, that is your Belt and Road Initiative key phrase there. It facilitates dollar-based cross-border payments and offshore lending. Again, the lending is the Belt and Road Initiative. Eurodollar involvement. Bank of China operates offshore banking units that handle dollar deposits and loans, often for trade and investment purposes. It's involved in dollar clearing and has been noted for its role in China's cross-border payment systems in Beijing. Then you have ICBC, the world's largest bank by assets. The Industrial and Commercial Bank of China handles significant dollar-based transactions for corporate clients, including trade financing and offshore lending. China Development Bank, a policy bank focused on infrastructure and international projects. CDB is involved in dollar-based financing, especially for Belt and Road Initiative projects. And there it is. Eurodollar involvement. CDB participates in dollar clearing and offshore lending with affiliates noted as direct participants in Hong Kong's U.S. dollar CHAT system. CHATS is an interbank settlement pairing system, and it's located in Beijing. Now, this was the aha moment for me because it confirmed that the Eurodollar system and the Belt and Road Initiative are actually the same thing. It's not that the Eurodollar system has evolved in a way that it now finances the Chinese expansion abroad. It's that the trade war, which is meant to impact trade deficits, meaning exporting too many dollars abroad, is the funding mechanism for Belt and Road. So this was what confirmed my economic warfare thesis, which is that the Eurodollar system being flush with dollars is the thing that we want to stop, and that is what finances the Belt and Road Initiative. That's why it's the same thing. Then it goes on to Hong Kong. Hong Kong, as a global financial hub, plays a significant role in the Eurodollar market due to its status as an offshore banking center, an extensive network of international banks. Many global and local banks in Hong Kong handle Eurodollars through offshore banking units and dollar clearing systems like CHATS. They include HSBC. The largest bank in Hong Kong, HSBC is a global leader in handling U.S. dollar transactions. Now, the original bank, Midland Bank, started Eurodollar arbitrage, cross-currency arbitrage trades in the 1950s. Caroline Schenk wrote a paper about this. I cited it in my book, Bitcoin Age. It's a very important story about why City of London was instrumental in getting the Eurodollar market started. It basically took the cross-currency interest rate differentials and exposed it as an area that banks could profit off of as long as they were able to borrow dollars in London from their customers. Now, this is also another fascinating thing. When we think about what banks are participating in this system and therefore which banks might be targeted specifically by the Trump administration, again, economic warfare must be your stance that you enter this discussion with, because if you're not thinking in terms of economic warfare, you won't see why the U.S. is trying to reduce its trade deficit. HSBC manages significant dollar deposits and loans through its offshore banking operations, facilitating trade, investment, and interbank lending. It's a major participant in chats with a monthly transaction volume exceeding $2 trillion. It mentions Standard Chartered, Citibank, Hang Seng Bank, and then it closes with some notes. China versus Hong Kong. In mainland China, Eurodollar activities are dominated by state-owned banks and policy banks, which handle dollars from trade and investment within a tightly regulated environment. In Hong Kong, a mix of global banks, local banks, and offshore banking units drive the Eurodollar market, benefiting from Hong Kong's status as an unregulated financial hub. If you want to keep exploring the Eurodollar system, China, the Belt and Road Initiative, banks in Hong Kong, and how the Trump administration is targeting the Eurodollar system, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and catch our premium research service. Become a TBL Pro at thebitcoinlayer.com/subscribe. We are going to continue to do the deep research necessary to narrate to you what is going on in the global economy, the reordering of global trade, the realignment of the monetary system, and, of course, Bitcoin's role in it all. We'll catch you guys next time.